The American Southwest of the 1890s wasn't a place for the faint of heart. It was a sun-bleached graveyard where the law was oftentimes a suggestion, and the desert was its ultimate judge. But even in a land of killers, some names carried a heavier weight of lead than others. It carried the sound of dry bones rubbing together. But this story could even make the snakes grow quiet. Because the Southwest didn't just attract the brave, it bred the vile. I give you the high fives. They didn't arrive with fanfare. They arrived with disdain. A sickness, 5 men, 5 ghosts. A brotherhood forged in an Oklahoma jail cell, held together by nothing but blood and the shared disdain of the light of day. They were the apex predators of the American Southwest. Enter Will Blackjack Christian, standing over 6 feet tall with a temper as hot as the Arizona sand. Blackjack didn't just break the law, he declared war on it. Alongside his brother Bob, he formed the High Five Gang, and with his help, they became the apex predators of the Southwest. You see, these weren't your cinematic gentleman bandits. They were thugs. They were loud, and they were about to trigger the most desperate manhunt in the history of the frontier. August 6, 1896. The heat in Nogales, Arizona was the kind that sat heavy on your lungs. But for the High Five Gang, the heat wasn't the problem. The problem was greed. They had their eyes on the International Bank of Nogales. It was a bold choice. Nogales sat right on the border of the U.S. and Mexico. On one side, the Arizona Territory, the other, Sonora. The perfect backdrop if things went south. At 1 p.m., 5 men rode into town. They didn't look like travelers. They looked like trouble. Blackjack, towering and lean, led the way. Alongside him was his brother Bob, 5 Fingers Jack Dunlap, George Musgrave, and Bob Hayes. The men didn't waste time with pleasantries. They busted through the door of the bank, Winchesters leveled. But it seems that they underestimated the people of Nogales. The bank cashier, John Lewis, didn't dive for the floor. Instead, he dove behind the counter and reached for his pistol. Outside, the town woke up fast. A local named Fred King heard the commotion and didn't run for cover. He ran for his rifle. Suddenly, the quiet robbery turned into a lead-filled nightmare. Inside the bank, the High Five realized the vault wasn't opening fast enough. The citizens were surrounding the building. Panic set in. The gang ran outside, scrambled for their horses, and fired wildly into the streets to clear a path. 5-Finger Jack Dunlap was the first to pay the price. A bullet from a citizen's rifle tore through his back, piercing his lung. He slumped over his saddle, coughing blood, but his brothers didn't stop to check on him. Blackjack screamed for a retreat. The mistake wasn't the robbery. The mistake was leaving witnesses. And now, with no gold and no plan, all they had was a dying man and the entire Arizona Territory waking up to hunt them down. 1,000 miles of empty, unforgiving earth. No water, no mercy. This was the beginning of an odyssey of survival, and behind them the law was mobilizing with a fury rarely seen. The High Fives fled east, pushing their horses until the animals' lungs burned. Smelling their scent like a bloodhound, U.S. Marshal William Meade didn't just send a few deputies. He called in the heavy hitters. He summoned the Arizona Rangers and the best trackers of the San Pedro Valley. The gang's trail was easy to follow at first. Jack Dunlap was literally bleeding across the desert floor, but Blackjack Christian was a fox. He knew the vile secrets of the landscape. He led the posse into the Mole Pass, the Badlands, where jagged volcanic rock tore the shoes off the lawman's horses. For the next several weeks, it became a game of endurance. The High Fives survived by raiding isolated ranches, stealing flesh mounds at gunpoint, and vanishing into the canyon before the dust from their arrival had even settled. They lived on raw horse meat and alkali water. They slept with one eye open and a Winchester in hand, and every time the law closed in, Blackjack would lead his men into the canyon so steep their horses could barely breathe. It was there that the true nature of the gang showed. They weren't just running, they were ambushing. April 1897, nearly 1 month after the Nogales job. By now, the High Five gang have been living like animals for months. They were skeletal, sun-scorched, and paranoid. The whittled-down gang had retreated into the hidden canyon of the Palencho Mountains, a place so remote Blackjack thought the desert had finally swallowed their trail. He was wrong. A posse, led by Deputy U.S. Marshal Bob Hildebrand, had found a single misplaced hoofprint near a hidden spring. They didn't ride in with spurs jangling. They dismounted miles away and crawled through the cacti on their bellies. They found the High Five camp in a deep, narrow gulch. The outlaws were unsaddling their horses, thinking that they had outrun the world. The law didn't shout for a surrender. In the vile Wild West, you didn't give a man like Blackjack a second chance. The first volley caught the gang by surprise. Will Christian, the towering leader, was struck multiple times. He collapsed into the dirt of the canyon that would eventually bear his name, Blackjack Canyon. But as the smoke cleared, the lawman realized victory wasn't complete. Amidst the chaos, Bob Christian and George Musgrave had vanished. They didn't run into the open. They melted into the shadows of the cave. And despite a frantic search, the remaining High Fives were gone. The death of Blackjack Christian marked the end of the High Fives gang, but it didn't end the legend. For years, sightings of Bob Christian were reported from the deep interior of Mexico to the high plains of Argentina. Some say the Blackjack treasure, the loot from a dozen smaller raids during the 1,000-mile chase, is still tucked away in the crevasses of the Palencho Mountains, guarded by the ghosts of the men who died for it. The High Fives weren't heroes. They weren't Robin Hoods. They were a violent reminder of a time when the Southwest was a raw, bleeding wound at the edge of the map. And it's a reminder to keep your back to the canyon wall. You never know who's watching. I'm Jerome, and this has been a journey into the vile Wild West. And if you have the stomach for more tales of the frontier's deadliest secrets, subscribe and join us for our next ride. The frontier is long gone, but the ghosts, well, they're still out there. Happy trails. Until we meet again.